One thing we need to talk about, because it comes up on 90% of the calls, is short-term versus long-term thinking when it comes to wealth and wealth creation. I always let people fill out their wealth worksheet prior to really having a deep dive into the conversation about how to. And it gives me insight into how they think about things, which is really important when it comes to laying a groundwork for success. If someone tells you exactly how to do that exercise, they'll really miss understanding some of your personal traits that relate to wealth building strategies. So here's an example, and this happens, like I said, most of the time. So if you watch this video prior to filling out the document, really think about this. When you write down your wealth goals, so let's say that you are 30. We're going to use some round numbers just to make it easy. You're 30 years old. You have $100,000 in assets, and you want to be worth $5 million, and you want to be worth that in 2 years. So that's your goal. You write on there, I'm 30. By the age of 32, I want to go from 100,000 to 5 million. So there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not a wealth goal. That is probably a short-term business goal, meaning that you want to quickly scale whatever enterprise you're in, maybe for an exit, or that's a growth goal for the business. But when you really think about your personal wealth, that net asset number, it's not probable that you're going to go from 100,000 in net assets to 5 million in 2 years, unless you have this huge cash flow business that you're going to start taking a ton of money out of. What I always like to do is, let's say, okay, so, and this is not using compound interest rates and things like that, because we're talking in such a short time frame. Let's say 5 million divided by 24 months. That means you need to put $208,333 a month away. Now, if you have a business that's churning out that kind of money, then it's a viable goal. But if I was to then ask you, well, how much are you taking out of your business each month? And you're like 10,000, going from that to $208,000 in a month isn't a wealth goal. It's a totally different conversation about scaling a business in order to achieve greater wealth. It's not about being right or wrong in this exercise, but what I want you to do is, if you're 30 years old and we're talking about wealth, look out further. Like if you're 30, and this, it's different for everyone. And this is where step 7 really comes into play, which comes after this, is if you're 30, talk to me about like what wealth looks like at 50. 20 years, that's a good amount of time to build a substantial amount of wealth. Now, that doesn't mean that you're committing yourself to 20 years of working ridiculous hours. That's not the conversation we're having, but we're trying to create a goal that's far enough out in the future that we can create an underlying strategy that gives you a high probability of getting there. All too often, many people set unrealistic short-term goals, and they do it to the detriment of any long-term vision. Not even a long-term goal, just having vision that the long-term exists. And we need to change that as part of this exercise or this process, so that you do have a vision for the long-term, and you are thinking long-term, and you're thinking beyond the next 24 months. Now, that doesn't mean that it's to discourage you in any way from trying to go out and creating that $5 million in 2 years. By all means, go after it. It's something that I do in my own businesses. I know that I have 5-year windows on things that I would like to do, and there's some big numbers in there. But I also know that there's an underlying part to my wealth building strategy that's always in play, that's never taken away from in order to try to go and do something big in the short term. The reason that I'm posting this video is this is such a critical part of long-term thinking and strategy, that you need to take the short term out of it for a little bit in order to do this exercise and to get to a real goal and a real strategy that has a high probability of working. Once it's laid out and you feel comfortable that, like, yeah, you know what I'm doing today, or with little tweaks along the way, I can reach what I want to do tomorrow. Now I can interject some short-term goals outside of this process and then go after those as you would any short-term goal. When you do those two things separately, it works. When you confuse the two, most often you tend to not reach either. And I would like to help lay out that long-term strategy and then put those short-term strategies in as pieces. But it's a separate conversation. We've got to get the long-term laid out first. We've got to get the underlying, we've got to understand the gap, and then we can work to close the gap. So again, I'm seeing this with a lot of people that I'm talking to. So I wanted to put this video out there in order to help you overcome this obstacle in your wealth building. All right, thanks. Peace.